They threw wine on the Sheikh until the waitress decides to defend him. Comment saying what you thought of this story, giving it a rating from 0 to 10, and tell me what city you're watching from. I really want to know if you liked my story, and I want to get to know you better. So subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. In the opulent Upper East Side townhouse of the Ashfords, one of New York's most traditional families, the gala celebrated another successful year of the family's oil business. Amidst Baccarat crystals and Dom Perignon champagne, the Manhattan elite gathered in their designer outfits, flaunting jewelry worth more than entire apartments and conversations about million-dollar investments that echoed through the Carrara marble-decorated halls. It was in this scene of unbridled ostentation that Khalil al-Rashid, a sheikh and powerful businessman from the United Arab Emirates, moved discreetly among the guests, his dark, penetrating eyes observing every detail of those who could become his business partners in the United States. At 35, Khalil carried on his shoulders the weight of leading an oil empire inherited from his father, but also the deep emotional scar of a betrayal that had made him suspicious of love and human intentions. Wearing his traditional white tunic embroidered with gold thread, he drew attention not only for his imposing height of 6'1", but also for the natural elegance with which he moved among the guests, like a predator studying its prey. His impeccably combed black hair and well-trimmed beard contrasted with the melancholy that inhabited his gaze, a reflection of years carrying responsibilities other men would never dream of facing. Khalil had come to America to close a multi-billion-dollar oil exploration deal in the Gulf of Mexico, but his exotic appearance aroused more than curiosity among some members of the American high society. Malicious whispers and tasteless jokes circulated through the mansion's corridors, disguised as innocent jests by those who had never had to work a single day in their privileged lives. On the other side of the party, navigating the kitchen corridors and between the tables in the main hall, Jasmine Miller moved with feline agility and professional discretion, serving the guests with a smile that hid years of tireless struggle and iron determination. At 28, the young waitress had grown up in a working-class neighborhood in Queens, the daughter of a bus driver who had died of a heart attack 2 years earlier, and a seamstress who now depended entirely on her for survival. Since she was 16, Jasmine had worked at events to pay for her business administration studies at a private night college, dreaming of one day opening her own event company and proving to the world that humble origins did not determine a person's destiny. Jasmine possessed a natural beauty that was striking even under the simple uniform she wore. Her curly hair was tied in an elegant bun that highlighted the delicate contours of her face, while her expressive brown eyes reflected a sharp intelligence and a proud demeanor that completely contrasted with her position as a servant at that party. She had learned early on that life gave no breaks to those born without privilege, but this only fueled her determination to overcome all barriers imposed by her background and the constant need to support her widowed mother. The night passed without major incidents until Richard and Felicity Ashford, the host's spoiled and arrogant children, approached Khalil with mocking laughter and prejudiced comments about his traditional attire, intoxicated by imported champagne and the arrogance of those who had never faced consequences for their actions. The siblings began to question aloud whether the Sheikh was really invited to the party or if he had sneaked in, like an exotic intruder looking for opportunities. Richard, a 30-year-old who had inherited his father's company without ever having truly worked, made a joke about out-of-season Halloween costumes while pointing at Khalil's tunic. Felicity, his 25-year-old sister, equally spoiled and cruel, laughed too loudly and decided the humiliation needed to go further. With a calculated malice that only truly empty people can demonstrate, She picked up a glass of red wine and, without any hesitation, poured the entire contents over Khalil's immaculate white tunic. The scarlet liquid spread across the expensive fabric like blood on snow, creating a stain that symbolized much more than a simple accident. Felicity laughed loudly and declared for all to hear that costumes should stay at the parade, not at parties for serious people. The silence that fell over the main hall was deafening, and all eyes turned to the embarrassing scene, but no one had the courage to intervene. Paralyzed by the fear of confronting the heirs of the host family, it was in this moment of devastating public humiliation that Jasmine, who was serving canapes nearby, immediately recognized who that man was. She had seen reports about Khalil al-Rashid on the financial news, knew of his international influence and his presence in the US for business that would move billions of dollars. More than that, she recognized in his eyes the same pain she felt when she was humiliated for her social status, the same contained anger of one judged by superficial appearances. Without hesitating for a second, Jasmine dropped the silver tray she was carrying, ignoring the sound of glass shattering on the marble floor. She grabbed a cloth napkin from a nearby table and approached the Sheikh with determined steps, completely ignoring the surprised and scandalized looks of the guests who could not believe what they were witnessing. With a firm voice that echoed throughout the hall and a fiery gaze directed at the Ashford siblings, Jasmine said that they had just humiliated one of the most powerful men in the Middle East, someone who could buy that entire mansion and all the family's fortune without even checking his bank account. Her voice did not tremble for an instant when she added that the real lack of manners was not in the clothes Khalil wore, but in the ignorance and classlessness of those who had assaulted him. Jasmine then turned to Khalil, offering him the napkin with a sincere apology on behalf of American hospitality, suggesting that he should leave that toxic environment where ignorant and ill-mannered people did not deserve his illustrious presence. Their eyes met for a few seconds that seemed to stretch into eternity, and something inexplicable passed between them, a spark of mutual recognition that transcended social and cultural differences. Khalil's reaction was one of deep surprise and a gratitude he had not felt in years. Accustomed to being defended only by well-paid security guards and subordinates interested in his power and wealth, he found himself before a woman who had risked her job and her reputation to defend a complete stranger, moved solely by a sense of justice and human dignity that he thought had disappeared from the world. When his eyes met Jasmine's, Khalil felt something he hadn't experienced since the naive days of his youth: genuine admiration for someone who didn't know his fortune, his status, or his position, but who had acted out of pure nobility of character. Jasmine, in turn, was completely struck by the intensity of that dark, penetrating gaze. Behind Khalil's majestic appearance and proud posture, she could see an emotional depth and a hidden pain that contrasted dramatically with his position of absolute power. It was as if, in those few seconds of visual connection, two souls, wounded by the cruelty of the world, had recognized each other, finding a silent understanding that needed no words or explanations. The magical moment was brutally interrupted when Richard Ashford, red with rage for being publicly confronted by a mere waitress, grabbed Jasmine's arm with enough force to leave marks. His voice was drunk with hatred as he snarled that she had completely forgotten her place at that party, that she should be serving in silence instead of giving opinions no one had asked for. The threat in his words was crystal clear. She would be fired immediately, and he would make sure she never got another job at any high society event in New York again. It was then that Khalil revealed for the first time the true extent of his power. His voice, until then controlled and polite, took on an icy tone of absolute authority as he declared that anyone who dared to touch Jasmine would have to answer directly to him. The air in the hall grew heavy with tension as Khalil explained, with a frightening calm, that his investments in the US moved figures that could easily destroy entire companies, including the Ashfords if he so wished. The threat was not empty. It was billions of dollars speaking, and everyone at the party knew it. Richard dropped Jasmine's arm as if he had been burned, while Felicity turned pale as she understood the magnitude of the mistake she had made. The family patriarch, Edward Ashford, appeared in the hall, drawn by the commotion, and almost fainted when he realized his irresponsible children had just sabotaged the most important business deal in the company's history. His desperate attempts to apologize to Khalil were met with a glacial silence and a look that promised devastating consequences. Khalil offered his arm to Jasmine with a gallantry that made the hearts of the women present race with envy, and together they walked towards the mansion's exit under the astonished gaze of all the guests. The image of the two leaving the party together, the powerful Sheikh and the courageous Waitress, was etched in everyone's memory as a moment that challenged all social conventions and established hierarchies. It was as if fate had decided to write a story that no Hallmark movie writer would dare to imagine. The days that followed brought inevitable and painful consequences for both. Jasmine was fired from the event company the next day after the Ashfords pressured her boss with threats of cancelling million-dollar contracts. They claimed she had been rude and disrespectful to important guests, inventing a distorted version of events that turned her into the villain of the story. Without a steady income and with her mother's medical bills piling up, Jasmine found herself in a desperate financial situation, but she categorically refused to regret defending what she considered morally right. Khalil, consumed by a guilt he couldn't explain, immediately cancelled all scheduled business meetings with the host family and spent days trying to find out who this extraordinary woman was who had stood up for him. His assistants and security guards were ordered to locate her discreetly, while he found himself obsessively thinking about those determined brown eyes and the impressive courage she had shown. When Khalil finally managed to locate Jasmine through a network of contacts that included everyone from private detectives to informants in the city's event companies, he made a decision that would completely change the course of both their lives. He offered her a job at his American company. The initial proposal was for an administrative assistant, but he made it clear that she would have opportunities for professional growth based exclusively on her merit and competence, not on favors or protectionism. The first meeting between them in the luxurious office of Al Rashid International was charged with a palpable sexual tension and a mutual attraction that both desperately tried to deny and control. Jasmine felt completely intimidated by the opulent environment of the entire floor Khalil occupied in the most expensive commercial building in New York, but also deeply intrigued by the genuine kindness and respect with which he treated her, a courtesy that radically contrasted with everything she had imagined about men in positions of absolute power. Khalil, for his part, found himself increasingly fascinated by Jasmine's sharp intelligence, the iron determination she showed in every task, and the refreshing authenticity of someone who had never learned to lie or pretend to get ahead. They were rare qualities he had lost hope of finding in anyone, especially in a world where everyone seemed to have ulterior motives when they approached him. The initial weeks of work were a period of mutual discovery and a careful dance around the growing attraction they both felt. Khalil began to include Jasmine in important meetings, asking for her opinions on business strategies and discovering, to his surprise and delight, that behind the humble origin was a brilliant mind and a strategic vision that impressed even experienced executives. Jasmine absorbed knowledge about the corporate world like a sponge, proving that intelligence and potential did not depend on lineage or expensive diplomas. Their conversations began to extend far beyond business hours, turning into long discussions about life, dreams, disappointments, and hopes. It was during these intimate conversations that Khalil revealed facets of his personality that few knew. The crushing weight of responsibilities inherited too young, the deep loneliness of one who always had to distrust the intentions of others, and the emotional scar left by a cousin who had betrayed his trust and love for family political gain. Jasmine, in turn, shared her daily struggles, her dreams of professional growth, and the constant guilt of not being able to provide a better life for her mother. Khalil became increasingly enchanted with her inner strength to overcome adversity, her unwavering loyalty to her family, and her impressive ability to find beauty and hope even in the most desperate situations. The passion that grew silently between Khalil and Jasmine became harder to control each day, especially during business trips that took them to different corners of the US. It was during these trips, staying in luxury hotels in cities like Washington, D.C. and Dallas, that the intimacy forced by professional proximity dangerously intensified the mutual attraction they both fought to deny. Gazes became longer and charged with desire, conversations stretched into the dawn in hotel lounges, and the sexual tension between them became almost palpable in the air. It was during one of these trips, in a five-star hotel in D.C., that the inevitable finally happened. After a particularly tense meeting with government investors, Khalil and Jasmine met at the hotel bar, both needing to relax after hours of complex negotiations. The alcohol loosened conversations that revealed deeper wounds. Khalil confessed how he felt like a prisoner of family expectations that even dictated whom he should marry, while Jasmine admitted her constant fear of not being good enough for the world she now moved in. When Khalil walked Jasmine to her hotel room door, the farewell that should have been professional turned into something much more intimate. Their eyes met in the silent hotel corridor, and all the resistance they had built in the previous weeks crumbled like a house of cards. The kiss that followed was explosive, charged with weeks of repressed desire and an emotional connection that transcended any social or cultural barrier. It was as if two soulmates had finally recognized each other after a lifetime of searching. The night they spent together was much more than a physical encounter. It was a fusion of wounded souls who found healing in each other. Khalil discovered in Jasmine a passion and a total surrender that contrasted drastically with the empty, calculated experiences he had known before. Jasmine, for her part, felt for the first time in her life truly desired and valued, not just physically, but in her entire essence. They made love with an intensity that definitively sealed their destinies, creating a bond that neither powerful families nor social conventions could break. In the weeks that followed, their secret relationship blossomed like an exotic flower in arid soil. Khalil became increasingly dependent on Jasmine's presence, not just as an assistant, but as the only person who could calm the storms in his soul. She had become his confidant, his intellectual partner, and the woman who made his heart beat faster with every smile. Jasmine, in turn, discovered a world of possibilities she had never imagined, not only professionally but emotionally, finding in Khalil a man who valued her for her intelligence and character. However, the cruel reality of the outside world would soon come knocking in a brutal and merciless way. Paparazzi photographers, always on the lookout for scandals involving famous personalities, managed to capture compromising images of the two leaving a restaurant in New York together, with gestures that made their intimacy clear. The photos were sold to gossip magazines that did not miss the opportunity to create a sensationalist scandal involving the billionaire Sheikh and the American Waitress. Khalil's family in the United Arab Emirates found out about the relationship through these internationally circulated publications, causing an earthquake in the traditional family structure. His uncles and advisors, conservative men accustomed to controlling every aspect of the heirs' lives, were furious at what they considered a betrayal of family traditions and a threat to businesses that depended on strategic marital alliances with other powerful Middle Eastern families. The pressure on Khalil became unbearable when family representatives arrived in the US unannounced, determined to force an immediate end to the relationship. In tense meetings that lasted for days, they argued that a marriage to an American of humble origin would destroy centuries-old political alliances and compromise billion-dollar contracts that depended on the trust of traditional partners who would never accept an outsider in the family. In parallel, Jasmine faced her own battles in a war she had never asked to fight. Sensationalist journalists constantly hounded her, portraying her as a calculating opportunist who had seduced the millionaire Sheikh for money and social status. The cruel headlines described her as a fortune hunter who had used her beauty to manipulate a powerful man, completely ignoring her professional competence and upright character. Even worse were the anonymous threats that began to arrive by phone and through messages left at her home. Distorted voices warned her to stay away from Khalil if she didn't want to suffer serious consequences, while intimidating letters appeared under her door with frightening details about her daily routine. Fear became her constant companion, especially since the threats included her mother, who was followed and photographed without her knowledge, becoming an innocent target in a war she did not understand. The situation reached its most critical point when Khalil's family sent a final ultimatum. He had to return to the Emirates immediately to marry the daughter of a regional political leader, as had been arranged years before, or he would completely lose his position in the family company and be disinherited. It was not just a financial issue, but one of political and social survival in a world where ancient traditions still dictated the rules of the game. Jasmine, realizing the devastating weight of the consequences her presence in Khalil's life was causing, made the most painful and courageous decision of her life. On a rainy autumn afternoon in New York, she went to Khalil's office and, with tears streaming silently down her face, declared that she was ending the relationship forever. She argued that true love sometimes required impossible sacrifices, and that she could not be responsible for the destruction of the family and the empire he had inherited. Khalil tried to argue, to plead, and even to threaten to give up everything for her, but Jasmine remained firm in her decision. Even with a shattered heart, she knew that if she stayed, she would forever be seen as the woman who had destroyed Khalil's life, and that guilt would consume her until her death. The next morning, she disappeared from New York without a trace, taking only a few clothes and the hope that with time, the pain of that separation would become bearable. Khalil was forced to return to the Emirates in a devastating emotional state, pretending to accept the arranged marriage while his heart remained completely given to the American woman who had chosen to sacrifice her own happiness for his. The preparations for the political wedding proceeded like a macabre stage play where he participated as an actor playing a role in a performance he hated, counting the days until he could find a way to escape the golden prison his life had become. The forced separation lasted for 6 agonizing months that felt like an eternity for both. Khalil tried to come to terms with the arranged marriage in the Emirates, mechanically participating in the preparations like a prisoner serving his sentence. Family meetings became tortures, where he feigned interest in the chosen bride, a young woman from a good family who did not spark in him a single flicker of what he had felt for Jasmine. Every night was a martyrdom of insomnia and memories that consumed him, making him question whether it was worth maintaining an empire built on complete personal unhappiness. Jasmine, for her part, had taken refuge in rural Vermont, in a small town where no one knew her story with the Sheikh. She got a job at a rustic inn that catered to tourists seeking rural tranquility, trying to rebuild her life away from everything that could remind her of her lost love. But the nights were cruel, filled with dreams of Khalil that made her wake up in tears, questioning if she had made the right decision by giving up the only true happiness she had ever known. During this painful period of separation, Khalil had discreetly hired private investigators to discover the true origin of the threats against Jasmine. His intuition told him there was something more than social prejudice behind the systematic persecution she had suffered. The investigation revealed a shocking conspiracy. Rival American businessmen, furious with Khalil's preference for negotiating exclusively through Jasmine, had orchestrated the entire intimidation campaign to sabotage his investments in the country. The documents uncovered by the investigators showed a complex network of executives who had hired paparazzi to photograph them, journalists to create scandals, and even thugs to make the threatening phone calls. The goal was to create enough emotional instability to force Khalil to abandon his expansion plans in the US, leaving the market free for established business groups that felt threatened by international competition. Armed with this devastating information, and finally understanding that true love was worth infinitely more than all social conventions and family pressures, Khalil made the bravest decision of his life. In a tense meeting with his family in the Emirates, he declared that he was definitively breaking with the imposed expectations, renouncing his position in the family company and giving up a substantial part of his inheritance to build his own empire in the United States, where he could live freely alongside the woman he loved. The family's reaction was explosive, with accusations of ingratitude, threats of complete disinheritance, and desperate attempts to make him reconsider. But Khalil remained unshakable in his decision, explaining that a life of wealth without true love was a golden prison he refused to accept. His determination impressed even the most conservative members of the family, who began to realize that perhaps there was courage and nobility in choosing the heart over traditions. With the resources he managed to preserve and decades of experience in the oil market, Khalil began creating his own company in the US, focused on sustainable energy and social projects that would benefit underprivileged communities. It was a way to honor the values Jasmine had awakened in him, proving that true power came from building something meaningful, not just from inheriting fortunes. The search for Jasmine became his daily obsession. Khalil hired the best investigators in the country to locate her, personally following every lead that emerged. When he finally found her at the small inn in Vermont, it was on a rainy autumn afternoon that seemed to have been chosen by fate itself for their reunion. Jasmine was tending to the inn's garden when she saw the familiar silhouette approaching on the dirt road. Her heart pounded in a way she had forgotten was possible, but the fear of new separations made her hesitate. When Khalil finally reached her, they both stood in silence for long moments, absorbing the reality of being together again after months of pain and longing. Khalil then told her everything he had discovered: the conspiracies against her, his decision to break with his family, the plans to build a new life in the US. He explained that he had chosen the freedom to love her over all inherited riches, that he was willing to start from scratch if it meant having her by his side forever. Jasmine listened with tears streaming down her face, realizing that the man before her had sacrificed an empire for love. The proposal Khalil made definitively sealed their fate, no longer as boss and employee, no longer as Sheikh and Waitress, but as equal partners in a love that had overcome all barriers imposed by society, family, and cultural differences. He asked her to marry him, promising a life where she would be respected as an equal, where her professional dreams would be realized, and where love would always be the priority over any social convention. The wedding took place 6 months later, in an intimate ceremony on a beach in the Hamptons, with only close friends and Jasmine's mother, who had finally found the financial and emotional stability she deserved. The company Khalil built in the US prospered beyond all expectations, not only financially, but as a model of social responsibility, employing hundreds of people from disadvantaged communities and investing in educational projects. Jasmine realized her dream of having her own event company, which became a benchmark in New York for organizing celebrations that combined luxury with social responsibility. Together, they created an empire based on values of justice, equality, and true love, proving that happy endings were possible for those brave enough to fight against all odds. Years later, when they told their story to their children, born of a love that had defied continents and cultures, Khalil and Jasmine always emphasized that true power did not come from inheritance or social position, but from the courage to choose love over fear, authenticity over appearances, and genuine happiness over the expectations of others. They had built together not just a financial empire, but a legacy of transformative love that inspired everyone around them to believe that fate reserves extraordinary rewards for those who have the courage to follow their hearts, regardless of the obstacles the world may impose. If you like this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment what you thought of my story, giving it a rating from 0 to 10, and thank you very much.